Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into one of humanity's most, well, compelling, confounding, and universally sought-after experiences. Love. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources here that honestly challenge many of our deeply held beliefs about this emotion.
They certainly do.
They invite us to look at love through a refreshingly unique and often counterintuitive lens.
Yeah, this isn't your typical rom-com discussion.
Definitely not. No fairy tales here. This is more like a deep philosophical and logical exploration trying to figure out what love truly is.
Exactly. How our minds construct it, how it interacts or maybe clashes with the world around us.
Yeah, clashes is a good word for some of it.
Indeed. This deep dive isn't here to just, reinforce the usual narratives.
Right.
Instead, we're aiming to really dissect the essence of love, explore how our individual minds actively construct it, and how powerful societal pressures can sometimes distort or constrain it. And ultimately, maybe figure out what a more liberating, more authentic experience of connection might actually look like.
Liberating. I like that framing.
We'll be navigating through some pretty profound philosophical insights and peppering those with real-life examples, anecdotes that really make you stop and think.
Make you pause, yeah.
Maybe even question some of your own assumptions. Our mission is really to get beyond the superficial.
Yeah.
To understand the complex gears turning behind this most profound of human experiences.
So if you've ever found yourself wondering, why that initial spark of love sometimes seems to just dim,
Right.
or why the weight of expectations can feel like this unbearable burden in a relationship,
Yeah.
then you are absolutely in the right place.
Hopeful.
Your mission here, like always, is to pull out the most potent nuggets of knowledge, the real insights from these sources, give you a powerful shortcut to being well-informed on this deeply personal yet, universally experienced thing.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack this together, peel back the layers, and maybe reveal a surprisingly different perspective on love.
Let's dive in.
The intoxicating high love as an individual experience.
Okay, so our journey into love starts with a really striking description.
It does.
The sources paint love as this intense, almost overwhelming emotion. They compare it to a powerful drug, something that induces this incredible high.
That's a strong comparison right off the bat.
It is. And what's particularly compelling is how it's shown as something that can literally override other fundamental physical sensations.
Like making you forget the world around you.
Exactly. Think about that. An emotion so potent, so all-consuming, that it can eclipse the very signals your own body is sending your brain.
It's not just a distraction then. It's
No.
more like a profound reprioritization of your whole sensory experience.
Yeah, reprioritization. That's a good way to put it.
Precisely. And there's a vivid anecdote in our sources that really drives this home.
Oh, yeah.
A person recalled getting a severe cut on their palm and genuinely not feeling any pain. None. Because they were so utterly consumed by thoughts of the person they loved.
Wow. That's intense.
It powerfully illustrates love's ability to, as the sources say, overpower and put everything down, suggesting this remarkable capacity to just transcend physical discomfort, everyday worries.
Right. It's almost like love acts as this potent mental anesthetic. Your brain is just so preoccupied with thoughts of this person that it actually downplays signals from your body. Like it's saying, nope, this emotion is way more important right now than that cut on your hand.
It points to a kind of psychological phenomenon where the sheer intensity of the emotion takes precedence over everything else, bodily states, mental states, all of it.
It's that feeling, right? We've maybe all felt versions of it, where you don't feel hungry or thirsty, you can't sleep, just because your mind is utterly absorbed. The loved one feels like, I don't know, an extension of your own personality.
An inescapable presence in your thoughts.
Yeah, the desire to connect or just to think about them is so overwhelmingly strong it overpowers other basic aspects of life.
And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, on a deeper level, what is happening in our minds during that?
Exactly. And this intense immersion, it's not just a fleeting moment, is it?
No, the sources describe it as something you can be completely immersed in for, well, quite a long time.
So like a sustained, altered state of consciousness.
Pretty much. Not just a momentary rush, but a longer period where your whole mental and emotional framework shifts. It becomes intensely centered around this one thing, this one person.
This prolonged, deep immersion. It raises a critical question then.
Which is?
If love can be this potent, this sustained, impacting our physical feelings, our mental states so deeply, what does that actually mean for our perception of reality itself?
Right. It strongly suggests that this high can become this dominant force, powerful enough to potentially, warp our view of the world, shape it to align with the intensity of that internal feeling.
So our inner feeling starts dictating our outer perception.
In a way, yes. It's a powerful testament to the mind's incredible ability to build an entire world inside itself. A world that can, at least for a while, override or selectively filter what's actually out there. Objective facts, maybe?
Okay, this leads us to a really fascinating, maybe even challenging concept from the sources.
Go on.
They suggest that this initial intoxicating phase of love, it often exists primarily in your mind.
The internal aspect again?
Yeah, and that it is in fact self-created. They actually say it's imagination taking over.
So not just a poetic phrase.
No, it's presented as the fundamental engine behind that overwhelming high. You're not just seeing a person as they are.
You're building something.
You're building a narrative, crafting an ideal, projecting it onto them, making them the star in this story you're writing in your own head.
This imagined reality, as the sources call it, is indeed the powerful engine generating that tremendous high. You think about them constantly when they're not there. You watch them intently, almost dissecting every little thing when they are there. And through all that intense focus, you essentially create this idealized, almost perfect version of them in your head.
In an idealized version, okay.
And here's where the sources make a really bold, maybe unsettling claim.
Okay.
They state that the problem of love, the misery it can sometimes bring, is actually self-created.
So the misery comes from us, not them.
It suggests the fallout isn't inherently from the person themselves, but from the gap that inevitably opens up between our internal, idealized version and their external, often imperfect, reality. As the sources put it, what you imagine was never a real thing.
Wow, that's blunt.
It is, but it's the core insight. The very mental construction that brings us such intense euphoria also lays the groundwork for our deepest disappointment.
So love at its peak is like this masterpiece we craft in our minds.
A beautiful illusion, perhaps. One destined to eventually run up against the unyielding, messy canvas of actual reality.
So let me see if I get this straight. We're building this elaborate, beautiful, almost perfect world in our heads. And it gives us this incredible feeling, this high. But the inevitable question is, what happens? What actually happens when that carefully crafted mental construct, that ideal, meets the messy, unpredictable, often imperfect nature of real life and real people?
Yeah.
It's like creating this perfect digital avatar, right? And then expecting that flawless avatar to perfectly match a complex, flawed, constantly evolving human being in the real world.
That's a good analogy.
This, the sources say, is where the conflict starts, the real struggle.
The gap between imagined and real, it can be huge, disorienting, and, often profoundly painful.
Okay, so building on that, there's another perspective here that's, profound and maybe a bit unsettling. The sources suggest that maybe you can never really love a person in the way we usually think about it, but rather you can only love the feeling of being in love. Or maybe love someone who evokes that feeling inside you.
So it shifts the focus entirely.
Dramatically, doesn't it? It moves the core experience of love away from the external person.
The object of affection.
Right. And places it squarely on an internal state, a self-generated emotional response. The person becomes more like a catalyst for that internal high.
Rather than the singular focus.
Exactly. Instead of being about the external person or some specific outcome, it pivots entirely to this internal subjective experience.
Okay.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. This approach is actually framed as a more efficient model.
More efficient? How so?
For everyone involved, apparently. Providing a super kick, they call it, and an unburdened enjoyment of the whole process of being in love.
Enjoyment of the process itself?
Yeah, it's about savoring the emotional journey, the internal state, not fixating on who the person is or what they might become or what they owe you. The sources even suggest this can happen with a virtual woman, meaning the external object can be entirely conceptual.
Because the core is the internal generation of that high. The mind's power is key.
Precisely.
And crucially, this model is described as coming without a commitment, not having an obligation, not having an expectation.
No strings attached, essentially.
It implies this incredible degree of freedom, just enjoying the emotional state itself, free from the usual relationship baggage.
That radically challenges, most conventional relationship thinking.
Absolutely. Which so often ties love intrinsically to commitment, possession, a rigid future path.
Right.
This view posits that the pure, unburdened feeling, that internal high, is what truly matters. And imposing external structures, like traditional expectations, can actually diminish or even poison that experience.
It's a remarkably unpossessive view, almost minimalist in terms of emotional connection.
Minimalist, but potentially very potent.
Building on this idea of love as primarily internal, the sources propose a definition of true love, not necessarily as a physical connection,
Okay.
but as the connection of one's consciousness to the other person, regardless of whether they are physically present or virtual or even just a memory.
Consciousness connection. So the object could be tangible or conceptual, an image, a thought.
And yet the emotional resonance, the depth of connection, remains profoundly real within your own mind.
Exactly. This perspective means that deep emotion can arise just from hearing their name or seeing their picture, recalling a memory. It's about a profound level of internal emotional engagement, not dependent on physical presence or conventional interaction, or even if they feel the same way.
So reciprocation isn't the point here.
Not necessarily for the experience of the feeling itself. It's described as an internal bond, a sort of mental intertwining, where your consciousness is truly linked, almost possessing in an abstract way the essence of the other person.
It elevates love beyond just physical proximity or shared activities.
Suggesting its deepest, most enduring form might reside in this profound mental and emotional link, an almost spiritual connection of minds.
The presence of the other, real or imagined, acts as the catalyst,
Right, it triggers that internal state.
which suggests the deepest connection isn't about being physically close or sharing life experiences necessarily.
What about that profound internal resonance? A bond forged in consciousness itself.
A connection that could exist almost independently of the physical world.
Which paradoxically might give it a certain timeless quality, less susceptible to external ups and downs.
Okay, but despite all the potential for pain, the inherent vulnerability that comes with investing so much emotionally,
Yes.
the experience of love is still considered by these sources to be, and this is a direct quote, worth to die as long as you can experience that for that time.
Wow. Worth to die. That's extreme.
It is. It's framed as a high that you should accept in life, almost like it's an unavoidable, vital part of being human.
That's a remarkably bold, uncompromising stance. It reflects the immense power and value they place on this emotional high, even if it's temporary.
It frames love as this essential, maybe even inevitable risk, something that profoundly enriches human experience, regardless of how it ends.
The journey, the intense feeling itself, is valuable, even if it leads to an inevitable fall.
That's such a powerful and, frankly, counterintuitive philosophy, isn't it?
It really is.
It suggests the ultimate point isn't lasting security or happily ever after.
But the profound, transformative experience itself, however fleeting.
Valuing the peak emotion above the potential cost. It's like an existential embrace of life's highest moments, even if they come with valleys.
It's almost a dare, isn't it, to open yourself up completely. Surrender to the experience knowing you might get hurt.
But believing the experience itself is so intrinsically valuable, so life-affirming, that it's worth any potential fall.
This radical acceptance of impermanence, finding value in the emotion's existence rather than its duration, that challenges centuries of conventional thinking about love and commitment.
Absolutely. Finding value in the moment, not the guarantee.
The crash of reality where expectations undermine love.
Okay, so we've explored these intoxicating heights, this self-created, consciousness-driven high.
Right, the peak experience.
But now let's unpack the core conflict our sources keep emphasizing.
The inevitable crash.
Pretty much. The moment an individual's exquisitely crafted, imagined reality of love clashes head-on with real-life expectations, and, crucially, the actual, imperfect person involved.
This is where the beautiful illusion starts to fray, when it's forced to confront objective reality.
The unpredictable, sometimes mundane, always imperfect reality.
Precisely. The tremendous high from that initial self-created illusion. The sources say it inevitably fades, specifically when, quote, in real life you start realizing what you imagine is in your head, it was never a real thing.
That moment of realization, that awakening.
That's where the problems really kick in. The self-created problem, that gap between ideal and real that actually does not exist in reality initially, now it manifests with undeniable force, leading to significant emotional fallout.
It's that painful moment the mind's perfect construct hits the wall of reality.
And the gap between the two becomes agonizingly clear. It's often not a gentle fade, but a stark, jarring realization. It forces a profound reevaluation.
So it's this powerful, almost tragic irony then.
How so?
The very mental process that gives us that incredible high. Our imagination, our ability to idealize, is also the exact mechanism that sets us up for such deep disappointment.
It's as if our minds are designed to create these beautiful, intricate, but ultimately unsustainable illusions.
We build these perfect castles in the air, right?
Yeah.
Filled with every imagined virtue. And then when we try to actually live in them, in the real world, with a real person, we find they just don't have foundations.
It's a powerful, somewhat tragic paradox. Our greatest capacity for bliss becomes our greatest vulnerability.
And this clash, this inevitable clash between the imagined and the real, it often leads to profound disillusionment.
And it's not just a mild letdown, is it?
No. The sources say it can trigger a reverse effect.
A reverse effect.
Yeah, transforming that initial adoration into something bitter. Even resentment towards a person.
Wow, from adoration to resentment, that's quite a swing.
The sadness comes from realizing that the perfect person you thought you loved, in that idealized, self-created way, they never actually existed outside your own mind.
It's a fundamental shift in perception. The object of intense adoration suddenly becomes the target of negativity. And not necessarily because of anything they actually did wrong.
But because the internal illusion shattered. An illusion they weren't even responsible for upholding.
It's a deeply powerful, unsettling shift, isn't it?
From that blissful high, you crash down into this deep sense of betrayal. Not necessarily betrayal by the other person, but betrayal by reality itself. Maybe even by your own mind for creating such a potent yet fragile thing.
That internal sense of betrayal can be profoundly personal. Makes you question your own perceptions, your judgment.
Your ability to see people clearly.
Exactly. And it can leave this lingering bitterness that subtly poisons future connections.
This leads us to another really thought-provoking, almost startling idea from the sources.
Okay.
The idea that our expectations can actually lead to a profound form of disrespect.
Disrespect. How does that work?
Well, if you project this idealized impression onto someone else, essentially giving them a lot more than they are,
Okay.
that is considered the highest form of disrespect.
Why?
Because fundamentally, you are not accepting the person for who they are.
I see.
This dynamic happens when your imagined ideal doesn't match their authentic reality. It places this undue, unspoken pressure on them to be your mental construct.
So you're seeing a version of them that isn't really them.
Exactly. And implicitly expecting them to live up to it. You're essentially denying their genuine self and imposing a false identity.
That's a profound reframing of how we interact. So by worshiping or idealizing someone, seeing them as perfect,
We're not actually seeing them at all.
we're seeing our own projection, a reflection of our own desires and needs.
Instead of acknowledging their independent, authentic self.
Yes, which means we're inadvertently imposing this huge burden on them.
A silent demand to be something they're not. To perform a role we've cast them in, instead of allowing them the freedom to just be.
It's a subtle but deeply impactful form of invalidation, often done with the best intentions, too.
Absolutely. And the sources highlight that the very imposition of expectations itself.
Just the act of expecting.
Yes, it can create a negative energy within love and relationships. Not just as a side effect of disappointment, but as an intrinsic harm to the emotional dynamic.
So it's not just about things not working out. The expecting itself erodes the foundation.
It seems so. Each unfulfilled expectation, each unspoken demand, each hope that falls short, it acts like a tiny friction point,
Accumulating over time.
generating this pervasive sense of underlying negativity. It's like a subtle but constant drain on the emotional resources of both people,
Where the focus shifts from genuine connection.
to silently tracking perceived deficits and failures.
It deeply suggests that the very act of expecting certain outcomes, behaviors, feelings from a loved one, no matter how well-intentioned,
Can inherently poison the well of the relationship.
like a constant low-level friction, a subtle pressure building up, making both people feel constrained, inadequate, maybe constantly observed.
It transforms what should be this spontaneous, free-flowing connection, a space of acceptance and joy.
Into a series of unspoken checkboxes, unfulfilled obligations, simmering resentments.
The freedom of the relationship gets sacrificed for the illusion of control.
And our sources dig into how conventional love, often tied to societal expectations like rigid commitment and the desire to possess,
Right. The standard package.
can lead to a fundamental loss of freedom for the individuals involved.
Which stands in stark contrast to that perspective we discussed earlier, valuing the loved person's freedom of choice of what she wants in life.
Exactly. Societal norms, they argue, often deeply embed possessiveness into the very definition of love, which creates profound conflict when it leads to believing things like, you should get angry if that person goes with another person.
Leading to deep insecurity, corrosive jealousy.
It's a conventional, almost unquestioned acceptance of possessiveness, which paradoxically often traps people within this narrow, stifling definition of what love should be.
Restricting their autonomy, their natural emotional expression.
So what often starts as this boundless, free-flowing emotion, a feeling of expansion, joy,
Can quickly get confined by these invisible but incredibly strong walls of societal expectations.
leading to intense anger, insecurity, a fundamental restriction of individual autonomy.
It's like taking a magnificent wild bird capable of soaring and putting it in a gilded cage.
It might be admired, but its true nature, its freedom, is fundamentally suppressed.
These ingrained expectations, often unconscious, transform love from this expansive, liberating force into a constricting one.
Often without us even realizing it until the weight becomes unbearable.
And the intense emotional high associated with initial love. The sources describe it as not lasting beyond sex in this specific case of sexual love. Furthermore, when the weighty expectations of long-standing commitment and the realities of daily life set in, that feeling of love, the initial euphoria, is no longer the same.
Suggesting a natural, almost inevitable arc for that intensity.
The initial drug-like phase is inherently transient, designed maybe to ignite a connection, pull people together.
But not presented as a sustainable state for a long-term reality. It's a powerful burst, meant for a particular phase, not the whole journey.
This implies that initial overwhelming phase is temporary, a heightened state.
And the sources underline that the complex demands of long-term reality inherently reshape the experience of love, diminishing that initial spark.
They even make a fascinating point about modern life, mentioning that as individuals become too busy and you're doing 100 things, the chance of you being in love will keep reducing.
That's interesting, the busyness factor.
It implies that the sheer time, mental space, and singular focus needed to sustain such an intense, all-consuming emotional experience.
Might just not align with the demands and distractions of modern lifestyles.
It's like the initial high requires this almost monastic single-mindedness that our daily lives rarely afford.
The world pulls us in too many directions.
Sexual love, a distinct and fleeting ecstasy.
Okay, now this is where our sources introduce a really provocative and distinct category. Sexual love.
Yes, a separate classification.
It's not just a nuance, it's framed as this separate, clearly defined form of connection. So what exactly is this sexual love? And what do the sources say is its primary purpose? How is it different from the broader idea of love we've been discussing?
Well, the core definition is startlingly functional, almost instrumental.
Functional.
It's primarily described as the act of creating that high in your mind to enjoy sex.
Okay, so the purpose isn't romance or long-term commitment.
No. Explicitly, it's to generate an intense emotional state, an internal high, that amplifies and enhances the physical pleasure of the sexual experience.
Enhances the physical pleasure.
The sources frame it as a pleasurable activity given by nature. No different, essentially, from the pleasure of eating a great meal or getting good sleep.
That's a very pragmatic view.
It is, almost purely instrumental. The mental high serves to make a natural act more profound and satisfying in the moment, but without the baggage of conventional romantic expectations.
It reframes the mind as a tool for elevating physical sensation.
Precisely. The mind as an active creator of states designed to elevate the physical, rather than love being solely about emotional or spiritual connection or a means to a traditional relationship end.
It's a utilitarian approach to connection and pleasure, almost.
You could see it that way. Now, a key characteristic defining this intense emotional high of sexual love, according to the sources,
Yes.
is that it generally won't last beyond sex.
So it's inherently fleeting.
Described as serving its purpose for the immediate moment of the experience. However,
There's catch.
there's a fascinating nuance, almost a counterpoint mentioned, a personal perspective claiming to have graduated to sexual love infinite timeless.
Infinite timeless. That seems to contradict the fleeting nature directly. How do we reconcile that?
That's the puzzle. It suggests an individual interpretation where the principle itself, using the mind to enhance pleasure, stripped of expectation, could potentially evolve, maybe into a sustained, ongoing model, not necessarily a continuous, intense high every second.
But more like a continuous, unburdened enjoyment of connection through specific, agreed-upon activities.
Exactly. It redefines infinite, not as endless intensity or duration in the traditional sense.
But as endless availability of this unburdened connection.
Precisely because it sheds the usual emotional baggage and future expectations. It's like optimizing the experience by removing potential failure points, like unmet expectations.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And expanding on its definition, sexual love is further viewed as simply a pleasurable activity given by nature that enhances experience.
Enhanced experience.
It's deliberately likened to other activities that bring pleasure when shared, like enjoying fine wine together or watching a great film with someone.
So the connection enhances the activity.
The core idea is exactly that. The mental and emotional connection doesn't necessarily create the activity, but it profoundly enhances it, implying that sexual interaction, like these other shared pleasures, is elevated by the mental presence and connection with someone you care for, rather than being an end in itself that demands the traditional commitment-heavy definition of love.
The emphasis is squarely on enhancing existing natural activities through conscious emotional engagement.
Without imposing extra, potentially burdensome layers of meaning or expectation.
And crucially, in relationships defined by this idea of sexual love, there's an explicit fundamental understanding that it comes without the traditional expectations or obligations of a conventional relationship.
A radically different social contract, then. Clear terms, transparent, mutually understood from the start.
Designed specifically to be devoid of the unwritten, unspoken rules and demands that usually come with traditional romance.
It's a conscious design to avoid those pitfalls we talked about, the disillusionment from unmet expectations.
Yeah, exactly. This implies a perfect understanding between the individuals, a level of clarity often missing elsewhere.
For instance, in such a relationship, you wouldn't expect gestures like flowers or morning coffee or any of those myriad unspoken duties of partnership.
Because it's not part of the deal.
Right. The relationship is strictly limited to its agreed-upon nature. It's presented as an incredibly efficient model because it allows a direct, unburdened exchange, free from the entanglements and subtle coercions of societal norms. Each person knows exactly what they are getting, and importantly, what they are not getting.
Without unseen duties or simmering resentment building up.
This radical transparency, the sources suggest, prevents that disillusionment we discussed by removing the fertile ground for unstated expectations to grow and eventually shatter things.
It sounds like a completely different paradigm for connection, one that prioritizes absolute clarity and mutual agreement above all else.
Overriding the often unspoken and destructive expectations of traditional relationships.
It's a conscious choice to limit the scope and definition of a connection, precisely to ensure its purity, its freedom from obligation, and its longevity on its own terms.
It challenges us to imagine relationships built on explicit understanding, rather than implicit, often faulty assumptions.
Reimagining connection, empowering dimensions of love.
Okay, let's circle back now to some of the more empowering, maybe liberating aspects of love that emerge here.
Right, the upside.
That ability of love to overpower and put everything down. It isn't just about an altered state. It points towards a deep wellspring of human resilience.
Resilience. How so?
It goes beyond just dulling physical pain. It suggests that in moments of intense love, people can tap into this deeper reservoir of mental fortitude, allowing them to rise above mundane distractions, discomfort, even significant adversity. It's almost framed as a psychological superpower.
Where the mind's singular focus on this intense emotion becomes a powerful shield against external challenges.
That initial anecdote, the one about not feeling the cut,
Yeah, that was striking.
it really speaks to love's astonishing capacity to help us transcend physical discomfort or other mundane worries. It's like it gives us a temporary mental shield.
Enabling us to stay focused, maintain a positive emotional state, even when things are physically tough or emotionally draining.
It fundamentally reshapes our experience of pain, transforms it from an inescapable reality into something that can be mentally reprioritized. Temporarily ignored, maybe, in favor of a more compelling internal reality.
It really shows the mind's power to shape perception.
Absolutely. So love, viewed this way, can be a source of incredible mental fortitude, allowing us to actively rise above everyday struggles, minor irritations, even significant discomfort, by channeling our focus onto that intense, positive emotional experience.
It's not just a passive feeling washing over us.
No, it's an active, dynamic force that can powerfully shape our experience of reality, making us more resilient, more focused, more capable of enduring challenges, all by channeling our mental energy towards that powerful, self-generated high.
Okay, and we touched on this earlier, but it deserves a deeper look. That deliberate focus on the feeling of being in love.
Rather than the person or the outcome.
Right. The sources say this can provide a profound super kick and an unburdened enjoyment of the whole process of being in love.
This idea of consciously savoring the internal emotional journey, rather than being bound by attachment to a specific person or outcome, it fundamentally changes the dynamic.
Puts the control back inside the individual's own mind.
Exactly. And this capacity to enjoy the process, remember, can happen even with a virtual woman, because it deliberately comes without a commitment, not having an obligation, not having an expectation.
That efficient model again.
Consistently presented that way.
Yeah.
It allows for an unburdened, continuous experience of the internal high, precisely because it's free from the crushing disillusionment expectations bring.
It redefines the contract of love, moving away from a traditional transactional model.
Where expectations are often unspoken demands.
To one of pure, unadulterated emotional experience. It's about maximizing the high by proactively removing the very things that typically cause its downfall. Unmet projections and societal obligations.
So instead of being constantly weighed down by all the what-ifs, shoulds, and musts that plague traditional relationships.
You can just enjoy the ride, the pure internal emotional experience.
Which is incredibly liberating, according to this perspective. It's almost like having your cake and eating it too, emotionally speaking.
You get the thrill, the joy, the intoxication of being in love, but without the inherent burdens, disappointments, and resentments that often come with relationships built heavily on expectation.
It's like a design for sustained emotional engagement without the usual hidden costs.
Now, the sources also introduce this remarkable personal philosophy where the speaker expresses a profound desire for the loved person to have freedom of choice of what she wants in life.
Okay, freedom of choice.
And this extends to the radical idea that the speaker would be genuinely happy if that person found happiness with someone else.
Happy for them, even if it means they're with another person.
Yes. Considering this a logical, even noble aspect of true sacrifice.
That is, profoundly counterintuitive for many of us. It directly challenges that deeply ingrained, almost primal possessiveness that often defines love in our culture.
It really asks us to redefine what it means to care for someone.
This is indeed a truly profound and, for many, incredibly challenging concept. It suggests love, from this viewpoint, isn't about control or ownership,
but empowers this radical generosity, a fundamentally non-possessive attitude.
valuing the loved one's happiness and absolute freedom above your own possessive desires, above your own need for them to be with you.
It's the ultimate act of letting go. Truly desiring the best for another, even if that best doesn't involve you directly.
Or means they find fulfillment elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
This requires an almost unparalleled level of selflessness, emotional maturity, and a massive shift away from ego.
It truly is the ultimate act of releasing control. And the sources make a crucial distinction here. If your whole thing to possess her is different from doing your best to make her more happy, then true love, by this definition,
means wanting their happiness above all else, even if it's found with someone else entirely.
that sets an extraordinarily high bar for emotional maturity, personal liberation.
It fundamentally requires shedding centuries of ingrained possessiveness, moving from a self-centric view of love what you get.
To an intensely other-centric one, where their well-being and freedom are paramount, regardless of the implications for your own attachment or perceived loss.
It really asks, is your love for them, or for the idea of them being yours?
Wow. That's a question to sit with.
Definitely.
Finally, as we wrap up, the sources use this really vivid, powerful analogy for falling in love.
Oh, yeah.
They liken it to going into the boxing ring with your guard down.
Guard down, meaning defenses have to be completely lowered.
It speaks directly to the inherent vulnerability required. You simply can't truly fall in love if you're armored up, holding back parts of yourself, unwilling to be seen fully.
That very act of self-preservation, ironically, prevents the profound connection you're seeking.
It implies an act of courageous surrender.
And this Inherent vulnerability, while undeniably risky, potentially painful,
Is presented as absolutely essential to the profound experience of love.
and paradoxically, it can be seen as empowering deeper connection, precisely by removing those self-protective barriers.
The sources are unflinching, though. They suggest you're going to be hit 100% in some way or the other. Pain and disappointment are almost guaranteed.
Right. No sugarcoating there.
Yet despite this certainty of emotional blows, the experience is still considered worth to die.
Implying that vulnerability isn't a weakness to avoid, but a necessary, courageous condition for that truly profound, transformative, intensely felt experience of love.
It's an act of profound courage, a willingness to expose yourself to potential pain in pursuit of something deeply meaningful, whether it lasts or not.
So this perspective suggests true profound connection requires opening yourself up completely, putting your guard down, even if it means taking emotional hits.
It's an act of incredible courage, a daring plunge into the unknown, trusting that the intensity, the meaning, the sheer experience of it
Will ultimately outweigh any potential harm or disappointment.
It radically reshapes our understanding of strength, doesn't it? Suggesting true power and fulfillment in love lie not in being impenetrable.
But in the radical ability to be completely open, unguarded, and vulnerable in the face of profound emotion. Outro.
Wow. What an extraordinary journey we've just taken through the complex, often paradoxical landscape of love.
It really has been a deep dive.
We started by understanding how our minds actively create that imagined reality, giving us that incredible, almost drug-like high that consumes our senses. But then we explored how that same imagination, when it inevitably hits the friction of societal expectations and real-life demands,
Can lead to profound disillusionment. And even, surprisingly, that form of disrespect through projection.
It's a powerful reminder of how intricately our internal worlds shape and sometimes clash with our external realities.
We explored sexual love as that distinct, unburdened interaction. A pleasurable activity enhanced by conscious mental connection, but stripped of traditional obligations. And then we re-examined the truly empowering dimensions of love, its astonishing ability to transcend physical pain.
Right.
To offer that efficient model of unburdened enjoyment, to inspire radical sacrifice for another's freedom, and finally the inherent courage in embracing profound vulnerability.
This deep dive really challenges us to redefine love beyond the conventional narratives, to embrace its complexity, its paradoxes, its often uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Perhaps it's an invitation.
An invitation to reflect.
Yeah, to reflect on your own imagined realities of love, the often unspoken expectations you carry into your connections, and to maybe question whether those expectations truly serve your deepest desire for genuine connection and joy, or if they are maybe a source of quiet misery.
Are you perhaps clinging to an illusion? Or are you ready to embrace the multifaceted, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating reality of love presented in these sources?
That's the question.
This exploration definitely raises an important overarching question for our increasingly complex world.
Which is?
In this era of constant information overload, shifting social landscapes, can we truly learn to savor the high of love, accept its often transient nature, and embrace a model that prioritizes individual freedom, profound generosity, and genuine unburdened connection over possessiveness and the heavy weight of imposed expectations?
Can we detach from that societal need for external validation in relationships, find profound joy in the pure internal experience of love, even if it means stepping outside traditional frameworks?
It's a profound challenge.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the most profound and liberating insights often come when we dare to look beyond the obvious and truly unpack the familiar.